She was just 19 years old, 7 months pregnant, and scared for her life. All she wanted was to be free, to keep her baby, to follow her heart and start a new life. But instead of love, her family gave her fear. They yelled, they pushed, they told her she had brought shame to their name. Her mother kicked her in the belly with her growing baby, her brother wrapped a vacuum cord around her neck, and as her baby moved inside her, they ended her life. Then, they buried her in a field. Far from home, they wrapped her in trash bags next to the tools they used to dig her grave, and on her hand was a number, the number of the man she loved. Her name was Rukhsana Naz, and this is her story. Welcome to the crime series. Before we begin, do us a quick favor. Drop your location and the time you're watching this in the comments. We want to know where you're tuning in from, because these stories matter everywhere. Like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Rukhsana Naz was born on April 13, 1978 in Derby, England, the daughter of Pakistani immigrants Mohammed and Shakila Naz. Her father, Mohammed, worked as a social worker, while her mother, Shakila, earned a living as a seamstress. They had come to Britain seeking better opportunities and a more stable future for their growing family, part of a wave of migration in the 1960s and 1970s, as many South Asian families settled in the UK to escape economic hardship and pursue improved prospects abroad. Rukhsana was one of 7 children in the Naz household. Growing up in Derby, she attended local schools and showed promise academically. Teachers and peers described her as bright, curious, and outspoken. Yet behind her quiet strength was a constant tug-of-war, one familiar to many young British Muslims raised in traditional households. Her family adhered to conservative cultural and religious values rooted in Pakistani heritage. Expectations were clear: obedience, modesty, and loyalty to family, above all. But outside the home, Rukhsana encountered a different world, one of individual choice, freedom, and personal autonomy. Like many second-generation immigrants, she straddled 2 worlds, the traditional values reinforced at home and the modern, liberal culture she experienced at school and among peers. By all accounts, Rukhsana was strong-willed. She wanted to live life on her own terms. She took pride in her identity but resented being controlled. Her relationship with her parents, especially her mother, was increasingly strained in her teenage years. While her father, Mohammed Naz, reportedly played a less dominant role in household decisions, her mother, Shakila, maintained strong influence over her children, particularly her daughters. For Rukhsana, this meant being subjected to constant pressure to conform. Her position in the family was further complicated by birth order and gender. As a daughter, she was expected to uphold the family's reputation through obedience and restraint. But Rukhsana was not passive. She questioned rules, asserted herself, and resisted decisions she felt were unjust, including the one that would define the rest of her life: an arranged marriage at a very tender age. Balancing the expectations of her traditional household with the freedoms offered by British society placed her in a precarious position. While she longed for independence and self-determination, her pursuit of that freedom would ultimately place her in conflict with those closest to her own family. In 1994, when Rukhsana Naz was just 15 years old, her parents informed her that she would be traveling to Pakistan to visit her ailing grandfather. For Rukhsana, the news came with mixed emotions. On one hand, the trip was presented as a family obligation, a chance to connect with her roots and spend time with relatives in a distant but familiar land. On the other, she had growing concerns, an uneasy sense that this was more than just a visit. She had heard whispers from extended family, sensed unusual tension at home, and noticed that her mother, Shakila, was making frequent phone calls to relatives abroad. Unbeknownst to Rukhsana, plans had already been set in motion long before her departure. The trip was not for leisure, nor was it primarily about reconnecting with family. It was, in fact, the final step in arranging her marriage to her first cousin, Sajid Nawaz, a young Pakistani man she barely knew. The match had been orchestrated entirely by her parents, following traditional expectations within their cultural and religious community. The family viewed the union as appropriate, even ideal. It preserved family ties, reinforced communal values, and aligned with generational norms where cousin marriages were not only accepted but often encouraged. When she arrived in Pakistan, Rukhsana was quickly confronted with the reality of what her trip truly entailed. There was no gentle conversation, no opportunity to decline, no space for negotiation. She was placed in a setting that offered little choice and even less support. The wedding was arranged swiftly, and Rukhsana, young, emotionally unprepared, and far from home, was expected to comply. She voiced reluctance, but her protests were brushed aside. Pressure came not only from her immediate family, but also from relatives in Pakistan, who viewed the marriage as a foregone conclusion. The ceremony itself was modest by traditional standards, but significant in consequence. With the exchange of vows, Rukhsana became Sajid Nawaz's wife, legally, culturally, and symbolically bound to a life that had been chosen for her. He lacked the emotional rapport or familiarity that Rukhsana might have shared with a partner of her own choosing. Their relationship, such as it was, had been built entirely on cultural obligation, not affection or mutual understanding. During her time in Pakistan, Rukhsana became pregnant. When she returned to the UK shortly after the wedding, she carried with her more than just the emotional weight of an unwanted marriage. She was now a wife and an expectant mother, navigating adulthood before she had even completed adolescence. Back in Derby, she tried to resume life as a student and daughter, but the transformation in her circumstances was impossible to ignore. Her friends noticed a change. She seemed more withdrawn, less talkative. Teachers, too, observed that she had become quieter, more distracted. Her pregnancy was soon visible, and though it was met with a mixture of concern and congratulations within the community, the details behind it remained largely concealed. Sajid Nawaz, meanwhile, remained in Pakistan. He was not granted a visa to join Rukhsana in the UK, and for the next several years, their marriage would exist across borders. They communicated through letters and occasional phone calls, but the emotional and physical distance between them only widened. Rukhsana gave birth to their first child, a son, in the UK. Her role as a mother took shape even as her own youth remained incomplete. She continued to live with her parents, raising her son under their supervision, while her husband remained a distant presence, more an obligation than a partner. In 1996, 2 years after the initial wedding, Rukhsana traveled once again to Pakistan. During this second trip, she became pregnant a second time. She returned to Derby to give birth to another child. By this point, Rukhsana was not just burdened with marital expectations. She was a young woman with 2 children, a husband she had only spent limited time with, and a growing sense of disillusionment about the life she had been forced into. Her dissatisfaction was not sudden. It had been building slowly, layer by layer, as she navigated the challenges of early motherhood, long-distance marriage, and unfulfilled personal dreams. She began voicing her frustrations more openly, expressing her desire to divorce Sajid Nawaz and rebuild her life. But every time she raised the possibility, she was met with staunch resistance from her family, especially from her mother. Shakila Naz remained adamant that the marriage was valid, honorable, and final. To her, the idea of a daughter defying her parents' decision, especially by seeking a divorce, was not only unthinkable, it was deeply shameful. As time went on, Rukhsana found herself emotionally trapped. She was physically present in the UK, raising 2 children and trying to regain some sense of independence. But culturally, legally, and psychologically, she was bound to a man and a marriage that had never been hers by choice. The strain of this situation was profound. Her mental and emotional health began to deteriorate. She often seemed conflicted, torn between duty and desire, compliance and resistance. By the age of 18, Rukhsana had lived through what many never do in a lifetime. She had been uprooted from her country, married without consent, made a mother twice over, and denied the basic dignity of choosing her own path. Her efforts to free herself from the forced marriage and to reunite with a childhood love would ultimately set her on a collision course with the very people who had promised to protect her. While still legally married to her cousin, Rukhsana Naz began to emotionally reconnect with a figure from her past, Imran Najib. Their bond had not been forged in adulthood, but in the innocence of childhood. They had first met at school in Derby, where they developed a deep and sincere connection, one that stood out against the rigid backdrop of their conservative upbringings. By their teenage years, Rukhsana and Imran had grown closer, spending time together in secret, exchanging letters, glances, and whispered dreams of a future that felt impossible within the walls of their respective homes. Their relationship, however, was met with strong resistance. The Naz family, particularly Rukhsana's mother Shakila, viewed Imran's background as incompatible with their social expectations. His family was seen as less prestigious, and his financial and cultural standing was considered unworthy of a match with their daughter. More importantly, the idea of Rukhsana choosing her own partner, especially one outside of a planned marital alliance, was considered unacceptable. Eventually, the relationship was forcibly broken, and Rukhsana was sent to Pakistan under the pretense of visiting relatives. It was there that she was married to her cousin, Sajid Nawaz, in a union rooted in family ties and tradition, rather than personal choice. Amid this growing strain, she reconnected with Imran, who by that time had entered into an arranged marriage of his own. Despite the complications of their respective circumstances, their feelings for one another quickly resurfaced. The relationship that had once been forbidden reignited with intensity, fueled not only by affection, but also by years of repression and unspoken longing. For Rukhsana, Imran represented the life she had been denied. A partner of her choosing, someone she trusted, someone with whom she could build a future on her own terms. Their renewed relationship, however, was not without risk. Both were technically still married, and the consequences of their union becoming public were enormous, especially for Rukhsana. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. The emotional connection she shared with Imran gave her the courage to consider a path forward, one that involved divorcing Sajid Nawaz and starting fresh with the man she had loved since her youth. In late 1997, Rukhsana discovered she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, which had been born out of an arranged and distant marriage, this child was different. It represented not only a new life, but a symbol of her agency, her choice, and her desire to break free from the confines of forced tradition. She was excited, nervous, and determined. To her, this pregnancy marked the beginning of a long overdue chapter, one where she could raise a child in a loving relationship of her own choosing. But the news shattered any remaining semblance of peace within her family. The idea that she was carrying the child of a man who was not her husband ignited outrage among her relatives. Her mother Shakila and her older brother Shahzad were particularly incensed. For them, the situation wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a public scandal. In their eyes, Rukhsana had disgraced the family's name. That she was visibly pregnant, while still legally married to Sajid Nawaz, was seen not only as an act of defiance but as an unforgivable breach of cultural and familial loyalty. The pressure began almost immediately. Her family pleaded, then demanded, that she terminate the pregnancy. They told her she was destroying her life and theirs. They warned her that no man would accept her after such shame. Rukhsana, however, stood firm. She refused to have an abortion. She refused to return to a marriage she had never wanted, and she refused to let her unborn child be treated as a mistake. To her family, this defiance was intolerable. But to Rukhsana, it was a declaration of self-worth. She had made her choice, and in that choice, peaceful, lawful, deeply personal, Rukhsana Naz crossed an invisible boundary that her family could not accept. A young woman's decision to keep her child, love freely, and live independently had become, in their eyes, a dishonor worth silencing. Family members repeatedly urged her to abandon her plans and return to her husband, Sajid Nawaz, who was still living in Pakistan. But Rukhsana remained resolute. She expressed a clear desire to keep the baby and pursue a divorce. Her goal was to rebuild her life with Imran Najib, the man she had loved since she was 12. Hold on a minute. If you believe stories like this need to be heard, if you believe choice should never come with a death sentence. Subscribe to help us share more voices like Roxana's. Hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Let's continue. The tension at home soon escalated beyond words. What began as persistent verbal pressure morphed into disturbing acts of physical coercion and psychological manipulation. Shakila Naz, already known for her strict adherence to family honor, began taking increasingly desperate measures to enforce her will. At one point, she reportedly kicked Roxana in the stomach, an act that was not only violent, but appeared to be a calculated attempt to harm the pregnancy. The message was chillingly clear. This unborn child was not welcome in the family. But the physical violence did not stop there. Shakila, determined to end what she viewed as a shameful pregnancy, encouraged Roxana to ingest an overdose of paracetamol, a reckless and dangerous method to induce miscarriage. The act, according to later reports, may have been an impulsive form of punishment disguised as persuasion. While the dose was not fatal, the intention behind it revealed a disturbing level of disregard for both Roxana's life and the life growing inside her. Not satisfied with at-home measures, Shakila reportedly consulted a doctor about the possibility of medically terminating the pregnancy. She wanted professional help in erasing what she viewed as a stain on the family's honor. But the response she received was not the one she hoped for. The doctor made it clear Roxana was already 28 weeks pregnant. At that stage, a termination would not only be medically inadvisable, it would be illegal and life-threatening. Any further attempts to interfere with the pregnancy could endanger Roxana's health or even her life. Despite this definitive medical warning, the pressure did not stop. If anything, it grew more intense. The family, particularly Shakila and her eldest son, Shahzad, became fixated on silencing Roxana's defiance. They were not only enraged by the pregnancy itself, but by what it symbolized: a complete rejection of their authority, a refusal to comply, and a break with tradition. To them, her choices were not just personal, they were acts of rebellion that threatened the fabric of family pride. On March 26, 1998, Roxana Naz disappeared. It was a Thursday, ordinarily uneventful in the Naz household, often marked by familiar routines. Thursdays had become a tradition for the family, a day reserved for gathering over dinner, where siblings reconnected and shared food around the table in their Derby home. It was expected, almost unspoken, that all members of the family would be present, especially the daughters, whose attendance was viewed as a mark of respect. But on that particular Thursday, something was different. Earlier in the day, Roxana called the family to say she was feeling unwell and would not be attending the meal. Her tone reportedly was subdued but firm. It was the kind of excuse that wouldn't normally raise eyebrows. Yet, for those who had been following the growing tension in the family, this decision was more than just a simple refusal. But well, according to her older sister, Safina, the story went deeper. Safina revealed that their mother, Shakila Naz, had directly advised Roxana not to come for dinner that evening. The reason wasn't her health, it was her pregnancy. At 7 months along, Roxana's body was changing visibly. Her mother feared that extended family members, some of whom would also be attending the dinner, might notice. There was rising panic in the household that word would get out, that their secret, their shame as they saw it, would become public knowledge. To Shakila, it was a matter of urgency to preserve the family's image. In the tightly knit British-Pakistani community of Derby, family honor was a delicate thread. Once broken, it could unravel years of respectability. Roxana's growing belly was no longer something they could hide behind closed doors. It had become a symbol of disobedience, of scandal, of a daughter gone rogue. That evening, as the meal proceeded without her, a strange and unsettling series of events unfolded. Around 7 p.m., Shakila announced she had to go visit someone in the hospital. No one questioned her. She left the house with 2 of her sons, Shahzad Naz, the eldest son and often her closest ally, and Iftikhar Naz, the youngest of the boys. The 3 of them left together, but only Shakila returned later that evening. Her return, just over an hour later, was quiet. There was no mention of the hospital visit. No explanation. No discussion. The silence spoke volumes, but no one in the house dared to ask. Safina, who had joined the rest of the family at the Nas home for dinner that night, began to feel unsettled. The tension in the house was palpable. She noted her mother's demeanor, tight-lipped and distracted. Her brother Shahzad had not returned, nor had Iftikhar. The meal concluded in an atmosphere of unease. By 10:30 p.m., Safina and her husband decided to leave. When they arrived back at their own home, they immediately noticed something was wrong. Rukhsana, who had been staying with them for several weeks after moving out of the family home due to escalating conflict, was not there. She hadn't called, hadn't left a note. Her belongings were untouched. Her absence, so sudden and uncharacteristic, set off alarm bells. Safina called her mother immediately, hoping for clarity. Shakila's reply was calm. "Go to sleep," she said. "There's no need to worry. She's probably out somewhere." But Safina's instincts wouldn't rest. She pressed further. She knew her sister. Rukhsana wouldn't simply vanish. She was heavily pregnant, emotionally vulnerable, and hyper-aware of her safety. Something was wrong. Fearing the worst, Safina contacted the police to file a missing persons report. But before the search could begin in earnest, another family voice intervened, her younger brother Iftikhar. According to Safina, he pleaded with her to retract the report. He warned that involving the authorities would bring shame upon the family, shame they could never recover from. In their community, a scandal of this nature could affect everything: marriages, business ties, social standing. The Nas family, already on edge about the pregnancy, now faced the added threat of public exposure. Under this pressure, caught between her concern for her sister and her ingrained sense of family loyalty, Safina reluctantly complied. She withdrew the report. It was a decision she would later regret for the rest of her life. For 5 days, the silence around Rukhsana's disappearance deepened. No calls, no visits, no clues. Friends and others in the community began to grow concerned, but the family maintained an unyielding front. There were no appeals for help. No posters, no mention of her absence to the broader public. It was as if she had never existed. Then, on March 31, 1998, over 100 miles from Derby, in a quiet stretch of farmland near Denby Dale in West Yorkshire, a farmer noticed something unusual near the edge of a field. A patch of recently disturbed earth. Drawn by instinct or perhaps concern, he began to investigate. As he dug into the soft soil, he uncovered black plastic bags. Inside, wrapped hastily, carelessly, and with chilling intent, was the body of a young woman. The police were called immediately. Forensic teams arrived at the scene. What they discovered confirmed their worst fears. The body was that of Rukhsana Naz. She had been strangled, later determined to be with a vacuum cleaner cord, and buried in a shallow grave alongside a set of garden tools. Her body was bruised, yet intact, and on the back of her hand, scrawled faintly in pen, was a pager number, belonging to Imran Najib, the man she loved. It was a detail that added a hauntingly human dimension to the crime. Even in death, she had clung to a trace of connection, of hope, of love. Her body was found wrapped in black plastic bin liners, buried with a set of garden tools believed to have been used during the disposal. The condition of the burial suggested haste, deliberate, but not professional. It was not an accidental death. Forensic analysis soon confirmed the cause. Rukhsana had been strangled with the cord of a vacuum cleaner. At the time of her death, she was 19 years old and 28 weeks pregnant. She had been carrying a male fetus, a child she had refused to give up, despite escalating threats and repeated pressure from within her own family. Once her body was found, it was clear. This was not just a case of a young woman in distress. It was a murder. One that would expose the dangers she had tried to warn others about, and set off a police investigation that would place her own family at the center of a national reckoning. Following the discovery of Rukhsana Naz's body in a shallow grave in Denby Dale, the police investigation moved swiftly and with growing urgency. The circumstances of her death were immediately clear to seasoned investigators. This had not been a crime of passion committed by a stranger. It was intimate, calculated, and deeply personal. From the way she had been killed, strangled quietly, then wrapped in bin liners and buried with garden tools. It was evident that those responsible had known her well. This wasn't an impulsive act. It was planned, controlled, deliberate. Detectives from Derbyshire Constabulary launched a full-scale homicide inquiry. They began by reconstructing Rukhsana's final days, starting with her movements, her relationships, and most importantly, her family dynamics. Very quickly, attention turned inward. Interviews were conducted with extended family, neighbors, friends, and professionals who had contact with Rukhsana in the weeks leading up to her death. School staff, health visitors, and social workers all spoke of a young woman under tremendous strain, emotionally and physically. She had been fearful, increasingly isolated, and vocal about the pressures placed upon her by her family. The police soon honed in on three key individuals: Rukhsana's mother, Shakila Naz, her 21-year-old brother, Shahzad Naz, and her youngest brother, Iftikhar Naz, who was 18 at the time. Each had been seen with Rukhsana on the day she vanished, March 26, 1998. According to family accounts, Shakila had claimed she was going to visit someone in hospital that evening, accompanied by her two sons. They returned approximately an hour later, without Rukhsana. The timeline alone raised red flags, but it was the forensic evidence that turned suspicion into confirmation. The garden tools discovered buried with Rukhsana's body were matched to those missing from the Naz family home. The vacuum cleaner cord used to strangle her was also conspicuously absent from their household. Police found that a new vacuum cord had recently been purchased, replacing the one that had vanished. Investigators concluded that the original cord had been used as a ligature in the murder and then disposed of with her body. Moreover, it wasn't just the tools that linked the family to the crime. It was the disturbing signs of prior planning. Investigators uncovered that spades, a torch, and even a bottle of acid had been acquired shortly before the murder. The acid, detectives suspected, was intended to disfigure or destroy evidence. Rukhsana had also reportedly been instructed by her mother to pack a trunk before leaving her sister Safina's home on the day she vanished. That trunk, investigators believed, was meant to serve as a makeshift coffin. Even more chilling was the discovery that Shakila and Shahzad had recently arranged for Rukhsana to write a will, appointing them as legal guardians of her two young sons. These were not random details. These were calculated steps in a well-planned execution. Further witness accounts revealed that tensions had been escalating for weeks. Rukhsana had faced daily harassment at home, particularly from Shakila and Shahzad, who were enraged by her pregnancy and refusal to terminate it. Family members recalled arguments so severe that Rukhsana had once been physically assaulted by her mother, who allegedly kicked her in the stomach. Friends reported that she had become increasingly frightened and had expressed concern that her life was in danger. Based on this body of evidence, all three family members, Shakila, Shahzad, and Iftikhar, were taken into custody for questioning. The police interrogations would reveal a tangled web of shifting stories, evasions, and conflicting accounts, each of which unraveled under scrutiny. Initially, Iftikhar Naz told officers that he had not been present on the night of March 26. He claimed to have been with his girlfriend, Louise, providing himself with an alibi. Louise initially supported his story, but within days, her conscience caught up with her. She returned to police and confessed that Iftikhar had lied. He had, in fact, admitted to her that he was present when Rukhsana was killed, and that his mother and brother were the ones responsible. She told detectives that Iftikhar had appeared distraught when he made the confession, describing the murder in haunting detail. Faced with Louise's testimony, Iftikhar changed his story. He now admitted that he had been present, but claimed the killing had not been planned. Instead, he suggested that the incident unfolded unexpectedly during an argument between Shakila and Rukhsana. He alleged that Shahzad had been the one to strangle Rukhsana using a vacuum cord, while their mother held her legs down and told him to be strong. He also stated that after her death, Shahzad kissed Rukhsana on the forehead and said, "I'm sorry," before placing his hand on her pregnant belly and muttering, It's not the kid's fault. He's innocent. Iftikhar claimed he was then threatened with a flick knife by Shahzad and forced to help wrap the body and assist with burial. Shakila Naz's statements were no more consistent. Initially, she denied any knowledge of Rukhsana's whereabouts. When pressed, she admitted to having been angry with her daughter and even acknowledged a physical confrontation weeks earlier. Later, when confronted with the emerging evidence, she altered her story again, now claiming that Shahzad had acted on his own and that she had tried to stop him. Yet she admitted to helping wrap the body in bin liners and dispose of it. According to her, the decision to bury Rukhsana was made by her sons. Shahzad, meanwhile, initially insisted that he had no knowledge of his sister's pregnancy and that the encounter had merely been a heated family dispute. He later confessed that he had, in fact, held the cord around her neck for 3 to 4 minutes and that he was provoked by shame. He claimed to have suffered a sudden and uncontrollable loss of temper, brought on by what he saw as a betrayal of family values and religious obligations. He denied that the act was premeditated, framing it instead as a reaction to disgrace and defiance. But for detectives, the pieces told a different story. The tools, the acid, the trunk, the will, and the coordinated retrieval of Rukhsana from her sister's home, none of it supported a spontaneous killing. It pointed instead to a methodical plan, one that had been set in motion weeks in advance. Rukhsana had not simply fallen victim to a tragic loss of control. She had been targeted by the very people she once called family. On the basis of overwhelming evidence, physical, testimonial, and circumstantial, all three were formally charged with murder. In May 1999, over a year after Rukhsana Naz's death, the trial began at Nottingham Crown Court. In the dock were her mother, Shakila Naz, and her brothers, Shahzad Naz and Iftikhar Naz. The proceedings would last 2.5 weeks, uncovering disturbing details of betrayal, control, and premeditated violence within the walls of a family home. The motive, prosecutors argued, was rooted in what is often termed a so-called honor killing. The key witnesses for the prosecution included Safina, Rukhsana's sister, who provided insight into her sister's fear and the events leading up to her disappearance. Also critical was Louise, Iftikhar's girlfriend, who originally supported his alibi. She later withdrew it and told the court that Iftikhar had confessed to being involved and identified Shakila and Shahzad as the killers. Under oath at Nottingham Crown Court, Iftikhar Naz, then 18 years old, recounted what he claimed to have witnessed on the evening of March 26, 1998. This testimony formed a crucial part of the prosecution's case. While Iftikhar admitted to assisting in disposing of the body, the court ultimately accepted that he acted under duress. Shahzad Naz initially portrayed the strangulation as accidental, then later admitted in court to having held the cord around Rukhsana's neck for 3 to 4 minutes. In court, he submitted a plea of provocation, claiming a sudden and temporary loss of self-control, brought on by feelings of shame over his sister's actions. He attributed his reaction to deeply held religious ideals, saying her decision to defy the family had overwhelmed him. On May 25, 1999, the verdict was delivered. Shakila Naz and her son, Shahzad Naz, were both found guilty of murder. As mandated by British law for such a conviction, they were sentenced to life imprisonment. Iftikhar Naz, the youngest of the 3 defendants, was acquitted. The jury accepted his account that he had been coerced into helping dispose of the body after witnessing the murder, and that he had played no role in the planning or execution of the crime. Imran Najib, the man Rukhsana had loved and hoped to marry, spoke to reporters after the verdict. Like Rukhsana, Imran himself had been in an arranged marriage, and he understood firsthand the pressure of family expectations. But his connection to Rukhsana had endured, and their bond had grown despite the constraints placed upon them. "We were in love, and she wanted to live with me," he said. "She was expecting my baby, and I was quite happy with that. We wanted to go away together, but we knew our relationship would be frowned upon in our community. We knew it could cause trouble." He explained that he and Rukhsana had feared the consequences of her pregnancy long before her disappearance. They both knew the risks, what her family might do, how they might react. But what followed had gone far beyond what either of them imagined. "When she told me she was pregnant, we knew there would be trouble," he said. "We were afraid she would be beaten and punished, and we thought they would try to make her end the pregnancy, but we never expected them to kill her." Imran's comments reflected more than personal grief. He spoke to a larger issue, the cultural system that had shaped their circumstances, and ultimately, Rukhsana's fate. "Without forced marriage," he said, "our lives would have been different. Rukhsana would still be alive today." His words offered a rare insight into the private fear and quiet defiance shared between two young people, caught between tradition and choice. For Imran, Rukhsana's death was not only a personal loss, but a tragic consequence of a system that left her with no safe path forward. In the months and years that followed, Shakila Naz attempted to challenge both her conviction and her sentence. In March 2000, she filed an appeal disputing the guilty verdict. The Court of Appeal rejected the claim, affirming that the evidence supported her conviction. By the close of the proceedings, the British legal system had delivered a clear message. No cultural or familial justification could excuse premeditated murder, even when committed in the name of so-called honor. Justice, however delayed, had prevailed in the name of Rukhsana Naz. If this documentary moved you, if you believe no woman should fear her own family, if you want more real stories that challenge silence and demand justice, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell to be notified when we share the next story that matters. And please, share this video. Her name deserves to be remembered, because awareness is the first step toward change.